Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. Hey guys, before we start the episode, definitely wanted to talk about my current orientation experience. It's definitely crazy to start off actually being a resident physician. You know, this week has been equal parts of nerve-wracking and exciting. You know, beyond the logistics, paperwork, credentialing, learning about different safety measures of the hospital, ACLS training, and all of that process, getting the long white coat, getting the beeper, and the official resident physician badge is pretty crazy and really exciting. I haven't actually started with patient care yet, so we'll see how that process goes, and I'll definitely give you guys some updates, but this is really exciting. My one request for this week is for you guys to join these social media feeds. We have a new social media manager, Jackie, and she's absolutely killing it with the images she's creating in association with the post. So you guys might have seen Dr. Alex King's posts and images with some of the great tips that he's leaving in his episodes. So guys, definitely join the Twitter, the Facebook, and the Instagram of the Happy Doc. This is absolutely exciting. And also exciting is our next guest, Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson. And she is the Chief of Digital Innovation and author of the Seattle Mama Doc blog. And guys, this is a champion of social media in the healthcare space. If you guys haven't heard of Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson, please check out Seattle Mama Doc. You can definitely search that on Twitter and Facebook. She's all over the internet. She has created many different digital innovations for the pediatric population. She's involved with the CDC and childhood immunizations. She was named one of Time Magazine's best Twitter feeds of 2013. And this individual, Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson, she is very high energy, she's innovative, she's inspirational, and we have a really great conversation for all physicians, for all doctors, for all students and health professionals on really learning from a great story about how to craft your career. And this is a common theme time and time again, but we learn from another doctor her methods and her tips on achieving fulfillment and satisfaction within the medical career. So guys, definitely hope you enjoy this conversation, and I hope you have a beautiful week. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. This is Taylor, and this is another episode of the Happy Doc. I am so excited to have our next guest, Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson, a pediatrician. She's also the Chief of Digital Innovation. She currently works at Seattle Children's Hospital. I'm not going to prolong the introduction, so Dr. Swanson, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning. Nice to talk to you.
Awesome. So before we get into some of our topics on happiness and fulfillment, I'd just like to kind of understand what you're currently up to as a pediatrician and your work in digital innovation.
Yeah, well, it's kind of an evolving journey, and the job continues to change and shift. And I think of anything to say kind of at the top here, it's that you can make up any career you want. and I often, when I speak and present, I'll talk about how this is kind of this experimental career for me that continues to change. So I split my time for multiple different employers, actually, to try to do the job that I feel is kind of a best fit for me. So I left residency, went out into general pediatrics full-time for 3 years, and then that's where I kind of stepped off and started to create a job really in social media and digital health. And digital health was really not even coined at that point. So I started to use Twitter and Facebook, and I wrote the first, what we know of, physician author blog for a hospital in the country, and that was way back in 2009. And it doesn't sound leading now, but at the time, nobody else was doing that. I mean, when I started Twitter in 2009, there was just a really small handful of physicians and medical professionals that were in the Twitter space, really thinking and kind of tinkering around, talking about kind of broadcast or narrowcast one-to-many communication in the health space in the translation. So where I end up today, and we can talk about the journey, but where I end up today is, I'm the chief of digital innovation, which again, made up job, made up department. I founded the Department and Center for Digital Health back in 2013 at the hospital. But that was after 4 years of blogging and working with entrepreneurs and using digital media. But I kind of break up the time where one day a week I'm in primary care clinic with an outside clinic called the Everett Clinic, regular routine primary care medicine. The rest of the time I split it up in kind of leading a team, building new communication tools, bringing in startup companies and running pilots. And then we've also created our own software development around communication in the health space, something that I call virtual handshake. And then I also am a TV news reporter for the NBC affiliate here in Seattle. So I go in and do 1 or 2 or 3 television segments weekly, just reporting on new research, reporting on new parenting trends, kind of hopefully breaking down myths, kind of talking about topics that are relevant regionally, but also nationally that way. And then I also have a speaking career. So I do a lot of travel. I'm usually on the road 2 or 3 weeks in the busy months of conference time, really helping clinicians. I do grand rounds talks. I do kind of keynote addresses, really talking about where are we going with AI? How is search really changing that kind of habits and immediacy of patients and families? And ultimately, what are our obligations as clinician leaders really to think on how are we going to do this differently? I mean, I bought a pair of shoes yesterday that I saw on Instagram. I clicked through it. When I wanted to buy, they're like, I don't know, these like recycled, overpriced $100 shoes or whatever. I was like, I like them. I click through on Instagram. It says, you want to do Apple Pay? I say, yeah. I click on Apple Pay. It takes my thumbprint. It pulls up all my address, pulls up my credit card, and clicks it all the way through, right? So in a matter of a couple seconds, I can sit on my deck with my kids playing in the yard and buy a pair of shoes. And yet we still make people call, wait on hold, make an appointment, sit in a waiting room, come in, take all their clothes off, wait for 20 minutes, and then we look in their ear. Right? I mean, it's just like the world of how we deliver healthcare from a service standpoint, but also from an opportunity of how we share information is really profoundly changing. So I kind of have, this career has really evolved from regular training. After I did my medical degree, I did a master's degree in bioethics at Penn. And that was in part because I was just really curious about the intersection of ethics and law and philosophy and how and what we think about and care about. And, I, at that time, studied and thought a lot about kind of way back in the day, kind of when, someone went on the Today Show and did an interview back when we really only had broadcast media, how did it change the doctor-patient relationship, or what we used to call the doctor-patient relationship? How did providers and patients communicate differently after they'd seen or heard or read about a health condition from broad-based media? And that kind of really evolved for me in thinking on how do I contribute my own self in kind of a unique way to medicine, and truly I just kind of continue to make it all up as I go along.
Wow. I mean, and as you were speaking, there are just so many opportunities and avenues for me to ask you crazy questions that'll last hours. And you just definitely, you are a very interesting person, and you're doing so much. So I am really thankful to have you here. Something that just kind of came to mind as you're speaking is, yes, you're immersed in this very innovative world of technology. And I love that story of the Instagram and the shoes, because it's so true. Everything is so streamlined now, and you can get anything you want literally at your fingertips while you're doing other things. So since you're working in that like innovation digital space, what are some of the innovations that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back, I mean, I think what's so remarkable about that space is that the digital interfaces, right, in the consumer space are completely taking friction out of it, right? So Starbucks, for example, this is data from, I don't know, over a year ago, but over 30% of their customers are using their app, right?
Wow.
And if you've ever, and this is not a Starbucks advertisement, but if you've used the Starbucks app, what you find is that not only is there kind of a loyalty program built in where, I can get a free salad every 12 coffees I get, but ultimately I can pre-order my coffees. I mean, walking towards the hospital, I can click on the latte. I walk over there and it's just sitting there for me. I upload with my fingerprint and the money, basically it takes me away from the money. The friction from what takes time in the interface for me to actually consume is gone. And so I think when I look at this from kind of an ethics standpoint or a public health standpoint, everything and anything we do in some ways, I think, should make it easier for us to get information to patients and families in the right time, at the right place that they deserve. And I kind of came to the public space out of vaccine science and safety. And I was reared as a new and young clinician. Like I left residency, I left grad school and med school in 2003, then went to residency, and then, kind of popped into primary care pediatrics right when Jenny McCarthy went on Oprah and said, the light went out of my son's eyes the day he got the MMR shot. And kind of wild hysteria began down the road of even greater distrust in science and safety of vaccines. So I kind of look at this as those interfaces of, it's not us that's going to change it, right? The interfaces of how we consume information, how we consume products, how we consume services is profoundly different. And those leading in the consumer space, things from, the Starbucks app to this little example of the silly shoes example, really just continue to be emblematic to me of the profound opportunity to say, there's this wheelhouse and there's this huge castle of intellectual property in healthcare that's continuing to evolve. And clinicians are overwhelmed by the amount they're supposed to know and that they do know. But our job is ultimately, particularly in primary care, but even in subspecialty care, is to make sure that what we're doing is getting the right information to the right patients and families at the right time. So I get really driven by that innovation work. So I guess I'm excited about, to answer your question more specifically, I'm excited about, for me, technologies or communication tools that harness and really do sit around a patient's experience and get them what they need at the right time. There's some lovely things going on. For example, the Amazon Echo. I got an Echo in my kitchen, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something like that. And, I've got two boys, so I have 8 and 10-year-old boys who can use, it makes me sound old, but can use technology, in kind of remarkable ways and ask Alexa questions or Echo questions constantly. But, Amazon Echo team partnered with Boston Children's recently and created an app. So you can have Alexa sitting in your kitchen. And instead of, what we used to call in pediatrics, mommy calls, the kind of middle of the night calls for the Tylenol dose, because as you probably know, we don't even have the doses for acetaminophen or Tylenol for kids under age 2 on the bottle. So new parents with new babies or infants or even toddlers, there are these mommy calls that sometimes it's nurses in practices, but there are sometimes really like physicians who are getting woken up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. for a mom to ask, how to dose Tylenol, let's say, or acetaminophen. You can have Alexa sitting in your kitchen and mom could say, my baby weighs, 18 and a half pounds. What dose of acetaminophen should I give? And the app is built and structured in there and tells you what to do. Or you can imagine the opportunity of putting Alexa or Alexa Dots that are now walking on the street. I'm in an Amazon country here in Seattle, but we have an Amazon physical bookstore here, and they were selling the Dot yesterday for $40. I was like, $40, right? So we could discharge patients with an Echo. They could go home. I'm making this all up, but they could go home and we could check in with them. There could be a nursing triage line that they could say, it's the next morning, and they could say, hey, yeah, I took my meds. Pain is still at a 2 out of 10. Things are going okay. And it could transmit. The possibilities in some ways when it comes to artificial intelligence for algorithms to be placed in them are, I think, really profound. But in the communication space too, I also just really like where we've come, where patients and families are doing this themselves. So patients and families are going online. They're making their own Facebook groups. They're making their own communities. They're going into startup technologies like Patients Like Me or a group called Smart Patients, where they go in and they find people with similar diagnosis, similar conditions, similar interest or endeavors even in getting involved in clinical research. And they share insight and education and information. And what we haven't done in healthcare, right, is actually broker those kind of peer-to-peer communications and support systems. And I think that's one thing I get really excited about, that almost taking out the institution of medicine from the center of care and actually allowing patients to say, I'm going to pick and choose where I get information from. I'm going to have my surgeon and I'm going to have my care team here, but I'm also going to have people who've been down the road before me. And at Seattle Children's, we did some tools. We used an iOS-based app called Tonic, which is ultimately like a survey tool or a clinical intake tool. Kind of takes the stuff that people put on clipboards in waiting rooms, all the kind of intake, social history, medical history, et cetera. And it also facilitates things that are called patient-reported outcomes, kind of after patients go home and they want, and hospital systems or clinicians want to know kind of like how you're doing. But what we did after liver transplant was we said, okay, these kids get these binders of information, these families get this binder, what can we digitize? And we basically put together kind of all the teaching about all the medicines that are used after a transplant. And we wrote a curriculum in it. So we put it in surveys, we uploaded videos, we used little YouTubes, we did introductions, but we also took patients and families who had had liver transplants before, and we recorded them talking about rejection, talking about how they did their pill reminders, reminding people things that were important about the system, et cetera. And we built a whole curriculum. So now instead of our pharmacists sitting at bedside after a transplant for somewhere between 6 to 12 hours with these families, they're only spending an hour or two doing that. And now the families are watching 4.5 hours of content, kind of that comes from patients and families and the experts together. And that's like a hack. I took an app that was designed for one thing and kind of on the back end with some HTML and some reworking, redesigned how we could present education information. But I mean, come on, like the amount that we video stream, the amount that the kind of new digital natives, and everybody hates that word, but it's true, that are coming kind of through the system, we don't need to do everything in a really redundant way. From being a neurosurgeon and talking about risks from hydrocephalus repair to being a primary care pediatrician and talking about car seats. I mean, you don't have to talk about this stuff over and over again all day. You probably could create some content and get it to people at the right time so that your time spent together, right, could be more meaningful. And that's where I get excited about thinking about waste in the system and ultimately enjoyment. I mean, as a primary care doctor, when I was working full-time in primary care and doing sometimes, and I do not exaggerate, over 20 well-child checks a day in addition to some sick care, at the end of the day, I really did say the same thing 20 times. If it was flu shot season, I was going through the whole little spiel on flu vaccine 20 times a day when I really could do a 2-minute YouTube video. Every patient could watch it on an iPad while the MA is getting them ready. So when I come in, I could say, do you have any questions about why I so strongly recommend the flu vaccine for kids over 6 months of age, as opposed to going through the whole spiel? Right. And maybe my day and my interest and my enjoyment of those children and families and answering their questions and my own personal satisfaction could be different. So that's where I get excited is trying to think on building tools that accomplish those goals. Really what I call dual centricity, not just patient-centered care, but earnestly patient and provider-centered care, which is I'm checking off boxes for clinicians at the same time as I'm creating education, information, and connection for patients and families to what they want.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. And first off, I love that term, dual centricity. We always talk like patient-centered care, but that was a great term used and something that I want to take in for the listeners there. It's not just about the patient or the physician; it's working together as a team. You also referred to that, earlier when you're talking about like Starbucks and the Instagram buying, the removal of friction. And I think that's something that's kind of running through the theme of what you're discussing is the removal of friction in all of these processes, streamlining things, making it a little bit easier, providing education at the right time, and those things that are exciting you. That's really great. Go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, all this came out for me, again, just as like a kind of global reminder, since your podcast is really about kind of finding your career, right? Like finding your stride in a career that's meaningful and rewarding. Like I would never not go to medical. I would never go back and not go to medical school. I mean, I can't believe, it's so disheartening in some ways how many people say that. But I think that the reason I can say that, even though and I will happily, Taylor, tell the audience here, we were supposed to record this a few days ago. And I was like, there is no way I'm recording this today because I had a bad day at work, right? So bad days at work happen, right? It's not that, but at large and globally, I mean, I think the reason that I feel really kind of thrilled and lucky to be a doctor is that I didn't kind of let the system tell me how I was going to do it. I went into regular practice and then Jenny went on Oprah and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like I can't sit on my hands anymore. People are writing mommy blogs. And, back in 2009, that was new. I mean, and it was just like, wait, moms are reading mommy blogs and they're learning about vaccines there. It was just like, wait, they're not only learning about it from their pediatrician. Then I need to write a mommy blog, right? Which is when I started writing Seattle Mama Doc. And I think the thing that was helpful for me in my career, but also to create kind of a leadership role, was not me just like launching a blog on the side. It was me going to the hospital, and it took almost a year, kind of like going to administration and then ultimately going to leadership saying, I think you need a blog and I'm going to write it for you, but you're going to pay me to do it. In that this isn't a hobby. This is part of my job as a clinician and a communicator and an ethicist and a pediatrician. I had a lot of medical debt to pay. I had, a baby at home. Like, it wasn't like I was just going to tinker around in my free time, but it was really, for me, I think, strategically thinking on, what am I good at? What do I like to do? And how can I get the organizations that I love and trust to understand that hopefully I can help work with them in their shared goals of what are the hospital, I basically wrote a purpose and goals document based on the strategies of what the hospital was saying were priorities, and then fitting in what I thought I could help, kind of how I could help them kind of embolden them. But I think it's just, and then, my job just kept changing. So I started just doing a blog, then I started using Twitter, then I started using Facebook, then I started working in TV, then I started kind of kept changing it. Then I started working kind of in digital health as that rose up. And so I just kind of kept changing myself and my career so that it not only fit, I think, where we were thinking and where healthcare is going, but it fit to what I was still interested in. So the job that I've had every year since I left training has changed. I mean, and I've only been out of training, I guess, 10 years, but every single year of those 10 years, it's been different. And I think not everybody needs to do it that way, but it's just one way to think about it, of continuing, you can continue to make yourself more and more expert by continuing to change what you do if you're building on what you're doing each year.
Mm-hmm. And first off, that was beautifully stated. And something that I want to go a little bit deeper here in terms of not what you were saying, but the how here, what you're describing. Running a podcast like what I'm doing, I listen to a lot of stories. And I'm sure the same thing, you listen to a lot of people's stories. And what you ultimately did to find kind of that deep fulfillment in what you do is you took ownership. You said, I'm not going to let this system control me. On the opposite, you said, what can I do to make things better? So you took that personal ownership to essentially say, you know what, this is how I'm going to change things. This is how I'm going to drive my work. And I think that mindset that you have personally has allowed you to be very successful in getting this ball rolling and developing your own career. And so something I want the listeners to take out of, what our doctor here is saying today is that deep ownership. You can take responsibility of your life and make improvements in your local section of what you're doing, and that's a theme that's overriding in a lot of what we do. The second thing I just wanted to note is how we're mentioning again and again the multiple opportunities that this medical degree provides. It's not just that static clinician, but look at our example here, how many beautiful things you're taking on with the digital media space and innovation. It's just awesome to hear someone like you.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that, there's no question that getting a medical degree provides you kind of a huge oasis in what you can do, right? I think once you're trained, once you've completed residency as well, then of course you have a craft, which makes it even that much more useful. But, I think there's a couple different ways. I mean, to go about saying, I'm not going to let the system define, control, or almost refine me, right? That if you tumble along in the system of healthcare, it'll probably move too slow for you, and you'll probably be so worn by it, you'll get depressed, and you'll have work-life balance challenges, and you'll be really dissatisfied, like almost half of our clinicians are. And I think there are different ways to do it. Some people are totally rogue, right? Which is not my style, but go out and sometimes we really need rogue people, but go out and say, I'm out of the system entirely. I'm going to stand, when you think about the beginning of kind of concierge medicine, right? These people were like, forget it. I'm going to go stand up a shingle. I'm going to maintain my credibility, but I'm going to do all the business side of healthcare all on my own. I'm going to make people pay out of pocket because they deserve the kind of care that I want to provide. But I kind of have done it a different way, for good and for bad. And I think it has led to significant frustration for me in that, standing up a center of digital health, being the chief of innovation right now, I don't even really know exactly what I'm getting done. I think I make a lot of content. So from my blog, I do a weekly blog, I do a weekly podcast, I do weekly video content. I spokesperson for the Academy of Pediatrics. I do a lot of work with the Department of Health and CDC. And that stuff I can look back and say like, oh yeah, I did something this week. But the pace of change for example, for me, and trying to change even our own hospital system of how in a kind of world-class research and academic center can I help move the funding and the resources and the right people from just standard IT type stuff to thinking kind of in the innovation space, that can be really slow and frustrating. But, I've taken it by saying I'm going to kind of hack the system from within. So I've stayed I haven't been working I've advised for startup companies, but I haven't done my own startup. I've said I'm going to kind of breed this enthusiasm and this from the inside, where I've had to kind of move and try to get executive support over the years, and then kind of changed my role and moved up actually in leadership roles. But by saying this is where healthcare is going, this is what patients and families deserve, and this is what clinicians deserve as well, like these tools to be better and for them to feel like they have something more nimble than their sole EHR, for example, as a tool. But I did it on the inside, and people can kind of determine who they are. Some people really can't function in the pace of academia and the kind of glacial pace that it changes. Some people use research to do so and raise research money on the outside. And then some people kind of tinker. I mean, I think one of the things that makes my life crazy, but also makes this all possible, is that I earnestly do have like 4 separate employers. It makes I have 6 emails and 5 social channels I manage because of it, and so it's nut job. But at the same time, it allows me to learn like, oh, how does a TV news station work? Because I actually work for the station. Or how does a primary care clinic work? And the Everett Clinic was a physician-owned clinic for years. It was just acquired by a group called DaVita. But how did that work? How did a for-profit physician-owned practice run? And then I've always kept my kind of home intellectual base inside academia, working for Seattle Children's, which is an academic hospital, and then I've kind of a speaking career and an agent that helps me with all that work. So that kind of diversity of, instead of the kind of Zuckerberg notion that I think people hear when they think about innovation, which is you only do one thing, you pour every single thing into one idea, and that's the only way you do it. Some of us, our brains don't work that way, that it can feel dilute and chaotic. But for me, working for multiple different kinds of people that are in the health space helps me then continue to feel that I can be creative, that I can kind of add and tinker and kind of sprinkle ideas in different kinds of organizations at the same time. And it's unusual to do it that way. And I think people don't typically give advice to make your life that chaotic. But for me, and the way my brain works, it's good for me to work with all these different kinds of groups in the health space. And I think it makes me a better leader than when kind of creating innovation and opportunity for innovation in other people.
Yeah, and I love that. I think, a lot of people say like, you do one thing and you get really good at that craft, so to speak, and you become the expert. But I was listening to, I forgot which podcast.
The 2,000 hours theory that was really promoted primarily by Gladwell. And there's a lot of data that goes against that. So, in medicine, for example, when we look at sports specialization in kids, some people think, oh, they're going to have their kid be a super, they're going to join Major League Soccer if their kid starts in these elite soccer when they're 7 or 8. And actually, there's a great data report that came out of the American Academy of Pediatrics that single sport specializations shouldn't start until age 16. So wow. You should have your kid be doing all different kinds of sports because they won't get burnout, they won't get repeated stress injuries, and they ultimately will likely actually become a better and more profound athlete if they want to kind of even maintain athletics in the high school or collegiate level, let alone the elite level. But that theory can sometimes, that's what I mean, it drives people to think, I need to put my head down and look at nothing else but one thing. And I think there are periods of life in our career where we have to do that. But at the same time, sometimes exposing yourself to so many different environments will allow you, if you're kind of if you think like an entrepreneur or think like a tinkerer or you think like a maker, that you want to have these ultimate multiple influences almost at once, so that you can kind of have gestalt in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. Like you getting all of this exposure from multiple fields, that just enhances the creativity process, When you're hearing all this information, all of a sudden everything just comes together. That's beautiful. And something with, more so the millennial generation, I think, we, as a younger generation, we get exposed to we got exposed to technology so early. So we have all of these influences, and yet if we're receiving, advice from the older generation, so to speak, that says, put your head down.
Yeah, I'm 40. I can out myself here. I'm I'm 43. I just turned 43. So yeah, I'm one of those old people.
No, well, but definitely you have the energy. You seem young at heart personally. But yeah, you're getting these exposures from multiple areas. Why not utilize them in multiple areas? And, I see a lot of, people getting burnt out and tired and exhausted. It's probably because they're just doing one thing. They're not doing a lot of things that they love. But, everyone has a different personality as you can attest. So
yeah, I'm basically just putting it out there there isn't only one way to do these things. There isn't only one way to kind of craft a unique career. I mean, I've talked to medical students where I've said, people constantly talk. I mean, as millennials, like people constantly talk about if you dilute my career down to just social media use, that with medical students and residents and trainees, we talk so much about making sure they're thinking about their digital footprint, right? Like making sure that what they've left behind is careful and thoughtful and it's professional, right? And it represents who they are in the professional sphere and making sure. But nobody really talks about not the footprint, but the fingerprint. The idea for me that I think the reason you should be using social media and connecting online and putting your bio up on not only LinkedIn, but on Doximity and on any other profile that you possibly can, is that it's the beginning of you telling the world what you uniquely care about and what you're good at. And that ultimately, it doesn't matter if you're a researcher or you're an entrepreneur or you're a primary care doctor or you're a cardiothoracic surgeon, that people are going to look at who you are online and they're going to make opinions about you before they even know you, and that you can kind of start knowing your patients, families, colleagues, whatever it is, by kind of creating that fingerprint, that everything you put online is not to be so worried about. It's just this profound opportunity to say, here's what I'm learning about. Here's the unique, kind of quilt of, here's where I did my undergrad. Here's what I did research in. Here's the nonprofit I worked for. And now I'm training in OBGYN, whenever, and I care about, sexually transmitted infections in teenagers. And the journey of how you got there and what you say is the beginning of how you create trust and how you create leverage to solve the problems that you ultimately want to solve.
Wow.
So I think, there's always ways to look at the things that we do and use in the digital sphere as risk. And there is risk. But there's also risk in not using them. There's risk of being disconnected. There's risk of not actually getting your ideas out to the world. And good grief, we get one shot at this lifetime, and not harnessing the tools of technology right now to kind of amplify what you learn and what your mentors have taught you and what your education has given you is, I think, a huge mistake.
Wow. So as you were speaking, I have a hypothetical situation that came to mind. Let's say you are Dr. Swanson, 25 or 26 years old. You're just about to, maybe you're in your third or fourth year of medical school, and you're putting in that place, 2017. How are you gonna craft your digital profile, so to speak, and who you are to make sure that you're being exposed and showing off your work in a really great way? Like, what would you do to develop yourself at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would do whatever I would advise, a listener or a young clinician. Like, I would advise them to use whatever channel they like. So I'm not prescriptive about this at all, nor do I think you have to do what I do and be on multiple channels and have a blog and all this hoo-ha. I think it's really, what tool do you like? If you like Instagram, great. If you're really still loyal to Facebook, great. If there's something else that you like, I don't know. I mean, I don't actually know I don't know a way to use WhatsApp in the health space very well unless you're in a kind of group format and you're actually using a group dialogue to provide leadership or share ideas. I mean, I'd say first and foremost, you just kind of stand up and put a bio out somewhere. And I mean it. Like, people Google you. You should be Googling yourself. This is not narcissism. It's just smart. You should be Googling yourself every quarter at least. Like, what is it that the world comes up with when they throw your name in? And you should have your mother do it too, because her filter bubble of what she searched in Google changes what she gets versus what yours does too. So you Googling yourself is not enough, right?
Didn't know that.
Yeah, so search engines change what they present to you based on your search patterns in the past. So Google wants to keep you happy. So if you read the New York Times and you're a far left liberal and you search stuff, you're going to get served up stuff that's kind of blue and left leaning and the stuff you like. If you're a staunch conservative and you watch Fox News, I mean, I'm making a ton of stereotypes here, but you watch Fox News and it's all red and that's what you search, that's what it's going to give you back too. So you should have other people, have your mom look, have a good friend who's not in medicine look, and see what pops up. Now, if you go write yourself, I mean, that'll take you a grand total of an hour, go write yourself a LinkedIn bio and put up a photo, and I hope most of young clinicians do this, but you're just creating that fingerprint. So start there and then think on, and I don't know, like I think one of the hardest things we do in the younger part, let alone for me in like my midlife, is constantly figure out what problem we're trying to solve. So really, like in your heart of heart, what do you want to do? Not what are you supposed to do, but what do you want to do? And once you start answering what you want to do, you don't have to know the answer specifically, but as you cultivate an answer, think on using whatever tool, Pinterest, Instagram, I mean, I'm talking social here, but Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is, and using that to help solve that problem. Well, let's say you really need to create, you're in a small town, you've just moved there, you've taken a new job, you don't have the patient volumes you want, you need to be discovered. Fine. Start sharing information online. Follow the rules of the organization that you work, and then go on and start sharing education using a photo with some text on Instagram, and then start telling people. I mean, the other thing is you have to tell people if the target is clinician colleagues, you have to tell them. If your target is the population or your desired patient population, you have to tell them. You have to tell your employer. I think the thing that people do when they start to go online is that they don't think their employer wants them to be sharing opinions and ideas online. And I think it's a mistake not to actually allow the organization with which you work to know what you're doing, because most often they want content from experts and physicians. They want to understand how physicians are sharing advice, and they probably will guide you at some point if you're not asking for their time. So I'd take you stand up a bio in as many places as you can, and you start to kind of look at your search, and then you go into whatever tool you want and start providing links and curate education. Just share things that are useful to people. That's all you have to do. Just be useful. Promote other people. I mean, I think that's another thing that people forget, is that they sometimes worry that in kind of building up their own fingerprint or letting the world know that what they know, it has to be all what they know. And actually what they know is what's good in other people, right? So that continuing to share and retweet and promote colleagues or ideas from others will no question in my mind, build trust in you.
Wow. That's amazing. I love that. I love that advice, and I hope the listeners really take that in. Something that came to mind as you're talking about this is fear. And, this is something I've talked to other guests about as well. But, when you do put yourself out there, you're online and everything. And I even go back to, I was doing a little bit of a board series, and I had some guests on to interview in medical school and asking them what their tips were for people being successful on the boards examinations. And, 3 out of the 4 of them wanted to be anonymous. And yet you're saying, let your institution know. You're saying, let, maybe your colleagues and everything know. So how do we overcome that fear, and why do you think that is such a part of medical society right now?
Yeah, well, so I argue against anonymity and pseudonymity online. I have for years. I guess now 5-6 years I've been kind of arguing against it. And that is, if you kind of take the oath and you take on the responsibility of being a clinician, it doesn't matter if you're just like, you drop a grapefruit at the grocery store, you're probably not supposed to drop the F-bomb, right? And because you're actually considered, a leader in that way. And online is no different in some ways that, I hope I didn't get lost in your question here, but online in the sense of being anonymous, that, if you're in a chat room or you're in a board prep or you're anywhere, that the anonymity in some ways, I don't know who that's for. I think it's probably to protect you, but ultimately isn't good for the world. So going on in a kind of a pseudonym type way or an anonymous way is not necessarily serving the public, which is ultimately your job. And so I think fear makes a lot of sense, and everybody's line with what they're willing to share publicly and what they're not is different. And it can actually shift and change throughout your career based on your experiences and exposure. So I think you should be conservative with yourself, right? I mean, I remember when I first started blogging way back in 2009, I never shared my children's name. I never shared photographs of them. I wrote a mom blog without sharing their faces, without sharing their names. I wrote about experiences and lessons and ideas. And it wasn't until I published my first book that and I published that with the Academy of Pediatrics, a parenting book called Mom Doc Medicine, that, we realized when I published the book, we couldn't leave my kids' names out of it at some point. We just got to the point, I said, well, like, okay, I'm different now. I've been in the public now for 3 or 4 years. I feel like hiding their name is not actually protecting their safety. And so I kind of changed the tune and evolved in that way. But for me, that was a big journey. And I still online don't very much share. Of course, I don't share very personal details about my children, or I don't really share their faces or anything else, because that's how I protect their privacy, and that's how I separate my professional and my personal lives, even though they're very intertwined. But I think the fear of kind of being out there is real, and it's something that people can and should give themselves time and bandwidth and space to deal with. In that, part of being a very public physician like I am, being in the news media, being a speaker, being on social, and is that I'm not anonymous, and there's a huge tax to the reality that when I go even just in a pro-vaccine space, I get very attacked. When I go even equivocal about something like circumcision online, I get attacked. Even if I don't even share, if I'm just sharing information and not even opinion, I get attacked. So so that's real, and some people are ready to take that on in ways, and some people are not. I mean, it's not. There are trolls and there are villains, and it is very easy for people to be kind of to dilute themselves to a brainstem or a mollusk online and throw barbs because they feel that there's some sort of an anonymous character to what they're doing, even if they're not, because there's some divorce from kind of being. It's not the same as being in the kind of face-to-face environment. So I think that's where you probably, as a physician, shouldn't be in a place if you feel like you have to be in that place in an anonymous way. But I feel like that lost from your board's question.
No, that was fine.
Pseudonymity, but
essentially, the big thing that I noticed, I mean, you basically answered it, but, I was curious because, I had these students on whom for all intents and purposes are just helping other students out, and they're worried about how their residency, for example, because they were applying to residency at the time, might perceive them being on a podcast and talking about boards questions, which was pretty ludicrous to me. But I just felt like everyone's very sensitive about what these programs might think of them, and then in your opinion, it's okay to share. It's okay to be bold and talk about those things. So it's
it can't be stupid, right? I mean, I think I always joke when I'm giving talks of like, if you're a moron in real life, you're probably going to be a moron online. It's like if you're just dopey and you make mistakes and you stumble in real life and you put your shoe in your mouth all the time, then it's like, then take your time when you're online, because you're probably going to do it online. And I think, boards questions, I mean, it's interesting because I think they're thinking about professionalism and making sure that somebody's not crossing line. I don't think you should cross the line. So, I mean, that's the part of like, I want people to push boundaries for the betterment of healthcare, for the improving the way that they disseminate information in public health, improving the way they provide care to patients and families, and optimizing in some ways how the system itself does our job, which is taking on the oath of taking care of people. And taking care of people, thank goodness, in the quadruple aim includes ourselves, right? Like that it used to be with the triple aim that completely left out those who delivered care. And now we're like, oh, right. To actually provide high quality care, we should make sure that those who are providing care are doing okay. So I mean, so you have to take care of yourself. But I do think that we do need to push the boundaries on suggesting, it's kind of like in a hospital system, one example would be, patient education materials historically have all been printed on paper and controlled by different groups and move across committees and go through, 6 months of checks when you're making a handout on constipation. And I'm saying now, it can't be that way. Clinicians shut the door and they say whatever they want, but if you put it on paper, you govern it down to you wordsmith it, you govern it, and you're very careful. It's okay, except that the world can go online and search how to take care of constipation in a couple milliseconds through a search engine and get whatever they need. And if your clinicians aren't making digital and aren't responding to things and aren't curating information, they're just driving themselves into irrelevancy. So the analog paper version, it's too risky to be so controlled sometimes because you just miss out on then letting those who have all the answers share what they need to know. I mean, so I mean, there's going to be a balance and a risk tolerance, and it's going to be different. But I think, med students or residents or someone going on a podcast sharing experiences or talking about the boards, if they're responsible for what they're sharing and they're ensuring that they're not sharing something that's not to be shared, illegal, some sort of intelligence that they're not supposed to pass on from one year to the next, then they're doing a great job. They're empowering someone to have a better understanding of how to succeed. They're not cheating, right? Like, I mean, there's of course a line. And I think it's just being clear. That's why I think when you do go and start making a fingerprint, or you do stand up a blog, or you do start doing a video series, or you do start working with a technology company, letting everybody know what you're doing is always the right thing. I mean, I remember when I took my very first job as a primary care doctor, and I still work for the same group. And I went in and I said, I'm interested in working with you full time, but I just want to let you know, I know I'm going to have a hybrid career. And I really do think at some point I didn't know I was going to work in technology. I thought I'd probably work in media. And from the very beginning, I told them that, so that every single time I reduced my FTE, when I went from 100% to 80% to 75% to 50% to 1 day a week, which I've done every single one of those transitions, and I'm the only one in my clinic who works the way that I work for the organization, they were behind me because I was transparent about my goals. I was transparent about my mission from the very beginning. And because it was ultimately successful, they got on board to it. So I think instead of it becoming a liability for me, it became an opportunity for an organization that I work to learn from and involve me and work with me as my career unfolded. So I think you can look at these opportunities as risks, or you can look at them as great opportunities to say, hey, I might do this a little bit differently. Tell me what you're worried about so that I can make sure that guidepost or that guardrail is in my mind, so that I don't cross over a line that makes you upset, but I build trust in who I want to be as a physician or a leader or a researcher or whatever.
I love that. And for me, it just sounds like you really just took a stand for who you are, and you created your way. You created your path, and you didn't let anything really stop you. That's beautiful. That's awesome. Yeah, it's great. And something that you did talk about, and it would be a disservice for us not to discuss this, is self-care. And you mentioned, when we were supposed to have the initial interview, like, you're having a bad day. So let's give me an example. So you had a bad day and things were terrible. How did you recoup for yourself?
Yeah. Well, I canceled the podcast with you. And it's funny, my assistant, I have a team, that helps me, and my coordinator and assistant gave me one time for Christmas or something, like a no button, because I'm getting better at it. I'm still really bad at it.
I love that.
And those who are entrepreneur, like people, you take every opportunity you possibly can, because you can learn, you can contribute, you can grow things. But she literally has this big, huge red button, and she's like, hit the no button. Just hit the no button. I'll be like, but so that day, nobody told me to hit the no button. I knew I needed to. I mean, I was in a bad spot. So first and foremost, I was kind of willing to say no to something that I knew wasn't going to be authentic. It was just like, that's not my style. Like, I can't go in and pretend that I'm happy on a day that I'm not. So I canceled that. I typically, as an extroverted processor, for me, some of the most productive things I do in self-care are a combination of wild engagement with my friends and colleagues. So I keep, one of my good friends who used to be the chief technology officer at HHS, one of her lines is, community is your superpower. And I have a couple different groups of friends who are entrepreneurs and kind of hackers in the health space. And they come about it as clinicians and entrepreneurs and business people, but that I keep, and that we talk almost every day in some way, either via text or via a group email, or on back channels on Instagram or whatever it is, that we kind of have a touch point almost every day as just nurturing, kind of fighting the man, just like dealing with it. And some of those for me as a woman in technology and healthcare are just groups of women who kind of support the frustration of when you do really start to hit these ceilings, because you do. So in an extroverted way, I kind of communicate, I vent, I pour out profanities for them of my frustration. I mean, exercise for me is a huge thing. So I'm a distance runner and always have been. So I ran, when I was in middle school, high school, and in college. And so for me, it's actually just getting outside and moving in some way. And that it sounds so banal in some ways, but there's just no question that the years that I wasn't, after I had my kids and was in residency, that was the least running I ever did. And it was probably the least productive for me too. So going for even a 20-minute or a 30-minute run will, of course, completely kind of flush me that way. And then I think it's kind of compartmentalization for me, because my husband's an academic physician and takes a lot of call, and our life is really busy with 2 kids and my travel schedule, because I travel so much. I've just kind of carved out the opposite of that extroverted space, which is the really quiet space. The idea of compartmentalizing just nothingness for a little bit. And that has been hard for me in the sense that with Wi-Fi being what it is, and even on airplanes, even airplanes are not sacred places anymore for thinking in white space. But I do carry around a little notebook, like a lot of people do, like a little moleskin, and I sometimes will like turn my phone into airplane mode, and I will just give myself 15 minutes. And that can be like in a parking lot, it can be on a bench, it can be halfway between a meeting in the hospital, it can be me unscheduling a meeting and just closing the door. And that can just be with my moleskin where I do nothing. It'll often be like the practice of gratitude, which I don't think we can do enough, which is, when I'm having a really bad day, so 3 days ago or whatever, when we were supposed to record this the first time, I went and I think I wrote like 3 thank you notes, however stupid that is. But writing a thank you note when you're having a really bad day, a thank you note to a friend, a thank you note for something that someone did for my kid, a thank you note to my child's teacher, whatever it is, like a one-card, one-side thank you note where I take a little nice marker and I draw a little doodle in the side and I write something down. It, of course, completely resets in some ways the pathetic way that we can get ourselves into kind of self-loathing, self-distrust, feeling like a failure, sense of overwhelm, and stress. I mean, it's just kind of... So some of those practices of gratitude in combination for me with a compartmentalization can sometimes really get me back on track.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, I loved all of those methods, and I hope the people listening are going to utilize some of those tips. Now, in the spirit of gratitude, I am so thankful for having you on today. I'm going to leave this space for you. Is there any message that you want to give out to the listeners? And also, how can people find you?
Sure. So first and foremost, the last thing I'd say is admit failure when you've got it. So, everyone says, oh, it's great, celebrate failures. But I mean, when you failed at something, good for you. And admit it. I mean, recently we had a Great Dane puppy for 8 months, and she ran my life sideways. And recently I gave her back to the breeder. How stupid example that is. She made my life hell, even though I wanted it to work. And at some point I stood up and I was like, you know what? I know everyone thinks you never should return a dog, but I'm returning the dog. I give up. I fail. And turned her in. So admit failure. But I think the other thing is it's kind of like forgive yourself in advance for all those failures. And then just as best you can, keep defining your career for things that you love. Don't do things because you're supposed to do them. You should spend this one very precious life that you have, spending your days as best you can in the days where you're doing things that you're good at and that you love doing. And you just of anything I can say is just keep redesigning your job to have more and more and more of what you want. If that's a different Monday from a different Tuesday, or that's more time in the operating room, or it's less time in the operating room, or if it's more time working in startup and technology, or it's more time, balancing your life and being outside, or it's volunteering, or it's actually having balance and only working 25% time. Is it possible to be a 25% physician and do other stuff and rock climb? Of course it is. Don't let anybody tell you it isn't. You can do whatever you want in whatever way you want. You just have to fight to figure out how you earnestly provide people value that you work for, and that you continue to be with high integrity, that you deliver to patients and families what they deserve, which is the highest, most ethical, highest quality, and safest care you can possibly deliver. And lastly, people can find me all over, but if you Google Seattle Mama Doc, that'll land on my blog, my Facebook, and my Twitter. But if you just Google my name, Wendy Sue Swanson, like you should be Googling your own, you'll find me all over the place. And the easiest way to find me is probably Twitter. It's where I spend my most time being most reactive. My email inboxes are a nightmare, but my direct message space in Twitter is probably the easiest way. So any questions or any connection or any learning that you can share with me, I'm open.
Wow. Well, there you have it, folks. That is Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson. You are just full of wisdom and energy, and it was so great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, take care.
Okay. Thanks, Taylor.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we want you to definitely subscribe to our social media channels. Check out The Happy Doc on Facebook, iTunes, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like, subscribe, share, and send us feedback. And please check out the website, www.thehappydoc.com. Again, we hope you enjoyed The Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. Peace out.